Why did everyone else hesitate when that command cracked through the air? It cut across the grand marble hall like a blade, foreign syllables snapping in cadence, sharp enough to silence every conversation mid-sentence. Soldiers paused. A few reporters frowned, scribbling down notes without comprehension. The audience froze in place, the echo of authority still ringing against the vaulted ceilings. But one person moved. She wasn't dressed in uniform. She wasn't carrying a rifle or medals. She was Lena, the quiet cleaning woman in a plain gray uniform, sleeves rolled up, pushing a mop across the shining floor. Her steps faltered when she heard the command, her hand tightening around the handle until her knuckles turned white. No one else recognized the words. But she did. They were a call she thought she would never hear again. Her breath hitched, her heart stumbled against her ribs, and before reason could intervene, memory rose like a storm. Sand and blood, screams in the dark, the crackle of a radio half broken with static. That same command had once been the rallying cry. It meant, gather the wounded, brace for the worst, hold the line at all costs. It was the language of survival, the hidden code of her old unit, spoken in a tongue almost no one else here would understand. Her eyes lifted. Across the hall the general stood tall, his chest lined with ribbons and medals that glinted under the lights. His gaze swept the room with calm certainty, searching for a response. And then he found her. For a moment time bent. The mop clattered softly against the marble as Lena stood still, her pulse hammering. She had worn a uniform once, too, not long ago. Barely 20 years old, pressed into a conflict that the world had already chosen to forget. Not on the news, not in the books, just endless fields of dust and broken men, her hands stained with blood as she tried to hold life inside torn bodies. The general's eyes locked on her as if no one else existed. He didn't need to say her name. The words had already summoned her. Her feet began to move, one step, then another, a pull she couldn't resist. The murmurs behind her swelled. What language was that? Why is she moving? Is this some kind of performance? But she didn't hear them. She heard only the pounding of her own heart and the whispers of ghosts at her side. She saw flashes, a bleeding soldier over her shoulder, her knees buckling beneath his weight. Her voice breaking as she called for a medic, though she was the medic. The flashlight beam cutting through the smoke while she stitched a wound with trembling hands. The silence after the last gunfire. The smell of burning earth. The bitter retreat. She crossed the distance like a soldier reporting for duty, though the sneakers on her feet squeaked softly against the floor. By the time she reached the podium, her chest was heaving, not from the walk but from the flood of memories she had tried so hard to bury. The general's expression softened almost imperceptibly, but his voice stayed steady. Report. One word spoken in their shared tongue. She froze. She hadn't spoken that language in years. The syllables felt rusty on her tongue, yet they came back with frightening ease, slipping past her lips before fear could stop them. She gave her name, her rank, her unit. And the room gasped. A ripple spread through the gathered crowd, officers stiffening, aides whispering, reporters leaning forward with wide eyes. The cleaning woman wasn't just a cleaner. She had been a soldier. She had been one of them. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke. The words tasted like iron, but they also tasted like home. She told him where she had been on that last night, how she had scrambled in the chaos to pull bodies into cover, pressing rags into wounds, begging men not to give up. She told him how she had slipped away under fire, crawling across miles of scorched ground to reach safety, carrying not a weapon but a stretcher strap slung across her shoulder. She told him how she traded her satchel of bandages for a mop, how she traded combat boots for sneakers, how no one in the city knew who she really was, until now. The general listened in silence. The only sound was the shallow hitch of his breathing. His eyes glistened, though he gave no other sign of weakness. And then, with deliberate gravity, he stepped away from the podium. His boots echoed, his medals caught the light. He stopped in front of her, and in full view of every stunned onlooker, he placed a hand on her shoulder. "You answered the call when no one else could," he said, "and you have again today." A current of tension rippled through the room. The soldiers along the walls straightened, their faces sharpened with respect. Applause began hesitantly, a polite tapping of palms, then swelled into a rolling wave that filled the chamber. Lena's throat tightened. For years she had chosen silence, blending into the background, unseen and unimportant. She had walked these halls with her head down, her life reduced to water buckets and detergent. Now she stood in the center, every eye on her, every ear waiting for her to speak again. And part of her wanted to vanish, to shrink back into the safety of anonymity, to remind them she was just a cleaner, nothing more. But the general's hand didn't leave her shoulder. It grounded her. It anchored her in place. And when he spoke again, his voice carried beyond her, to every man and woman present. Bravery does not fade with time, and it does not need a uniform to be real. The applause thundered. The marble hall trembled with sound. But Lena heard something else beneath it, a whisper, a memory, the low moan of a dying soldier who had once grabbed her wrist and begged her not to leave, the memory of a promise she had broken, a promise she had buried with him. And in that moment, surrounded by praise, pinned beneath the general's regard, she felt a different weight settle into her chest. Guilt. It clawed at her ribs, cutting deeper than any applause could heal. Because no matter what the general saw in her, no matter what these strangers believed she was, she knew what she had done. She knew who she had left behind. Her eyes dropped. She swallowed hard, but the lump in her throat wouldn't move. The applause softened, fading back into murmurs. People began to shift, whisper, scribble notes, film her with glowing screens. But Lena, she just picked up her mop. Her hands trembled as she dipped it into the bucket again, pushing it back across the marble floor. But something in the air had changed. The coldness of the hall seemed to lift, replaced by something warmer, something watchful. She felt eyes still on her. And when she dared a glance over her shoulder, the general was still watching her, not as a stranger, not as a cleaner, but as a soldier, as a story that refused to stay buried. And Lena knew in the pit of her stomach that this was not the end. The command he barked had not been an accident. The words weren't just a test. They were a summons. And whether she wanted it or not, her past had just found her again. How long could she keep pretending nothing had changed? Lena pushed the mop across the marble floor, the faint squeak echoing against the high ceiling. Conversations had already resumed in fragments around her, though none of them carried the same tone as before. Something invisible had shifted in the room. She felt it in the way soldiers glanced at her now, quick flicks of the eyes before they snapped their gazes away, like they had seen too much. She wished they would stop. She wished the general had not looked at her at all. The bucket sloshed as she pressed the mop into it harder than she meant to. Her reflection wavered in the rippling water. She hardly recognized herself anymore. The plain uniform of a cleaner, hair tied back with no attention to neatness, hands from work no one noticed, and behind her eyes, a story no one wanted to hear. At least, she had believed that until today. A sound behind her, firm footsteps, heavy with intention. She stiffened before she even turned. "Walk with me," the general said. Not a request. Her mop handle slid from her hand, clattering to the ground. She followed. What else could she do? The hallway outside the chamber stretched long and empty. Portraits of commanders and decorated leaders lined the walls, their painted eyes watching with eternal judgment. She kept her gaze low, counting tiles as they walked. Neither of them spoke. The silence gnawed at her nerves, reminding her of nights when silence meant death, when the absence of gunfire meant the enemy was repositioning. Finally, he stopped near a side door and gestured her inside. It wasn't an office, it was a storage room. Shelves lined with files, maps rolled into tubes, stacks of dusty crates, a forgotten corner of the building. The door shut with a click. He turned. His face was closer now, stripped of the distance of the podium. His eyes were not cold, but they were sharp, too sharp. "You shouldn't be here," Lena whispered before she realized she had spoken. The corner of his mouth tightened. "Neither should you." Her pulse stumbled. He knew. Somehow he knew everything she had hidden. "I left," she said quickly, the words tumbling out in defense. "I walked away. I built a different life. Whatever you think you saw in there, it's gone. I buried it." "Buried?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Do you know what it cost me to use that command again? Do you know how long I've waited for someone, anyone, to answer it?" Her breath caught. She shook her head slowly. He leaned against the table stacked with crates, exhaling like the weight of years pressed against his ribs. "That language, our language, was never meant for ceremonies. It was a call reserved for the wounded, for the forgotten. I used it today because," his gaze lifted and met hers, "because I was told you were dead." Lena staggered back a step. "Dead?" Of course. That night, the ambush, the retreat, the screaming chaos. Reports must have listed her among the casualties. No one had searched after the smoke cleared. No one had known she crossed the border alone, stripped herself of her past, rebuilt a shadow of a life where no one could find her. And yet here he was. "I tried to save them," she whispered, the confession cutting her throat raw. "I tried, God, I tried, but I couldn't. I carried as many as I could, and the rest," her voice cracked. She pressed a hand to her mouth to stop the sob threatening to escape. The general didn't move closer, but his voice softened. "No medic saves them all." But Lena shook her head violently. "That night there was one. He grabbed my wrist. He begged me not to leave. I told him I wouldn't, but I did. I left him there." Her chest burned. The memory had been locked tight for years, but once spoken aloud, it ripped through her like fire. "I broke my promise," she whispered, "and I've been running from it ever since." Silence fell heavy between them. Dust motes drifted in the light from the single window. The general's eyes narrowed, but not in anger, in understanding. "We all carry the weight of the ones we couldn't save," he said quietly. "But some weights aren't meant to crush us. They're meant to remind us why we stand." Lena stared at him, her nails biting into her palms. "Why now? Why me? Why say that command in front of everyone?" His jaw tightened. "Because what's coming will need more than soldiers who only know how to shoot. We need someone who understands pain, who knows the cost, someone who can hold the line when others break." Her stomach turned. His words weren't ceremony, they were a summons. "No," the answer burst from her like a reflex. She shook her head again, stepping back toward the door. "I can't go back. You don't understand. I'm not that person anymore." But his voice followed her, steady, relentless. "You were never just a medic. You were the one who refused to give up when the rest of us did. Do you think I don't remember? Do you think I didn't watch you crawl through gunfire with 2 men on your back? You stood where even trained soldiers faltered. Don't tell me you can't. You already did." Her hand hovered over the door handle, trembling. She could leave. She could walk out, return to her mop, her bucket, her quiet anonymity. She could vanish again, just as she had all those years ago. But deep inside, beneath layers of exhaustion and denial, something stirred. A flicker, a pulse she thought had died. Duty. And it terrified her. She turned her face away, hiding the tears threatening to spill. "Even if I wanted to, I don't belong anymore. I don't have the strength. I don't have the right." The general's reply was almost a whisper. "Strength is not about right, it's about choice." Her fingers clenched around the handle. She pulled the door open and stepped into the hall, her chest heaving as though she had run miles. She didn't look back. She couldn't. But his words followed her like shadows. "Strength is not about right. It's about choice. That night, alone in her small apartment above the laundry shop, Lena sat at the edge of her bed staring at the worn sneakers on the floor. The city outside hummed with indifferent life, car horns, laughter, the buzz of neon signs. None of it touched her. Her hands trembled in her lap. She pressed them together as though to still them, but it only made the shaking worse. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, the past stormed back. The battlefield, the broken bodies, the promise she had broken. And the general's eyes, watching her, waiting. She rose before dawn, restless. She paced the room, whispering to herself as though reasoning could untangle the knots in her chest. I can't go back, I can't. They'll see what I did. They'll know I failed. But another voice echoed louder inside her. You answered the call when no one else could. She pressed her palms to her ears, desperate to drown it out. But the truth clung to her like smoke. She wasn't being asked to erase the past. She was being asked to face it. And that, more than any battlefield, was the fight she feared she couldn't win. Why did she dream of the dead again that night? The room was dark, her body exhausted, yet her mind refused rest. In her dream, the battlefield rose around her in brutal clarity. The air reeked of smoke and metal, and the ground pulsed with muffled explosions. She ran with a stretcher strap cutting into her shoulder, blood soaking her uniform, a soldier's desperate voice pleading in her ear, "Don't leave me." She jolted awake with a gasp. Sweat clung to her skin, her sheets tangled around her legs like restraints. Her throat was dry, but her heart pounded as if she'd sprinted miles. It had been years since the nightmare had taken her so vividly. Years since she'd felt that boy's grip on her wrist, the sting of his betrayal in her mind, though she was the one who had left him behind. She sat on the edge of her bed, burying her face in her hands. Dawn leaked gray through the blinds. There was no going back to sleep. She found herself walking without direction. The mop and bucket had been left where they were at the hall, as if some invisible tether had snapped. Her feet carried her to the riverfront, where old stone bridges crossed water that looked black in the early light. The city stirred around her, commuters, street vendors setting up stalls. But she felt detached, drifting among them unseen. Until she saw him. The general. He stood alone at the rail, staring across the water. No guards, no aides, just a man with the posture of someone who had carried too much for too long. Her stomach dropped. She considered turning back, disappearing into the crowd, but before she could, he looked up. His eyes found hers instantly, as if he had expected her. He motioned her closer, with the faintest tilt of his head. Against her will, her feet obeyed. They stood side by side, separated by silence and the steady ripple of the river below. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, he broke the stillness. "Do you know why I believed you were dead?" She swallowed, her voice low. "Because I should have been." His jaw flexed. "Reports said you never made it out. No trace, no body, just fire and silence. I carried your absence for years." Lena's throat tightened. She didn't want to hear this. Didn't want to know what her disappearance had cost others. "I don't belong in your world anymore," she whispered. "I don't belong anywhere." He turned, his gaze sharp. "That's not true. You chose to bury yourself, but the war didn't bury you. And now," his words paused, heavy with meaning, "the war is returning." Her stomach twisted. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "What are you saying?" He reached into his coat and drew out a thin folder. Paper, yellowed at the edges. He opened it, revealing photographs clipped inside. Buildings reduced to rubble. Civilians herded through checkpoints. Faces hardened with fear. Lena's breath hitched. She recognized the terrain. The desert ridges. The villages carved from sand and stone. The place where she had once lived, as if each sunrise might be her last. "They're stirring again," the general said. "The same faction we fought years ago, reorganized, funded, ruthless as ever. And this time they're targeting the ones who can't fight back." She stared at the images, her hands curling into fists. Memories pressed hard against her chest, screams in the dust, bandages soaked through in minutes, children's eyes wide with terror. "You have others," she said, her voice brittle. "Soldiers, medics, people trained, equipped. Why drag me into this?" "Because they don't remember the language," he answered. "They don't know the signals, the terrain, the codes. You do. You lived it. You survived it. And survival has a language no academy can teach." Her breath came shallow. "I'm not the same person anymore." "You're exactly the same," he said quietly. "The difference is you've convinced yourself that's a weakness." His words struck deeper than she wanted to admit. She turned her face away, blinking hard. The river shimmered with reflected light, but all she saw was blood on sand. The general closed the folder and placed it on the rail between them. "You don't have to answer me now, but if you walk away this time, understand what it means. More villages burned, more children carried away, more promises broken." She flinched. His choice of words, promises broken, dug under her skin like a blade. When she looked back, he was gone. The folder remained. Her hands hovered above it, trembling. She wanted to leave it there, to let the wind scatter its pages into the river. But she couldn't. Her fingers closed around it like iron shackles, and she pulled it to her chest. That night she sat at her kitchen table, the folder spread open under a single lamp. Photo after photo, map after map, notes scrawled in shorthand she still remembered how to read. Every page felt like a stone on her chest. She could hear their voices again, the wounded she had once carried, the dying she had failed to save. She saw their faces in the shadows of her apartment. And underneath it all, one question rose louder than the rest. Was she being asked to redeem herself, or to relive her sins? She pressed her palms hard against her eyes, but the images wouldn't fade. At last, near midnight, she whispered aloud into the empty room, "I can't." But her hands betrayed her. They folded the maps. They slid the photos back into the folder. They placed it gently, carefully, into her bag as though she already knew she wouldn't resist. When she finally crawled into bed, she couldn't sleep. The general's words circled like a chant. "Strength is not about right, it's about choice." And Lena knew, whether she admitted it or not, she had already chosen. Why did her hands still know what to do? Lena sat on the floor of her apartment, knees bent, the folder open beside her. She had pulled out one of the old maps, tracing lines with a finger that trembled only slightly. The names of villages were faded, but her mind filled in the gaps. Her memory conjured every ridge, every crossing, every trail where she had once run with lives hanging from her shoulders. Years of mopping floors had not erased what she had learned in the dirt. And that terrified her. She shoved the folder shut, pressing her palm flat against it as though she could smother the ghosts inside. But she knew what would happen if she tried to ignore it. The general's words would fester. The photos would stain her mind. The silence would no longer bring peace but accusation. By dawn, she had already made a decision. Not to return, not to fight, but to meet him one last time, to tell him face to face that she was not his answer, that she would not be dragged back into blood and loss. Her resolve carried her across the city, though her feet felt heavier with every step. The military complex loomed like a fortress, walls of stone and steel layered with guards. She expected them to turn her away, to laugh at the sight of a cleaner asking for an audience with the general. But when she gave her name, her real name, not the one on her work badge, something shifted. The guard stiffened, muttered into his radio, then waved her through with a wary look. Inside, the hallways were lined with polished tile and humming lights. Lena's shoes squeaked with each step, betraying her nerves. She hadn't walked halls like this in years, but the rhythm of it returned to her body like muscle memory. Left, right, pause, keep your back straight, keep your eyes sharp. She hated how natural it felt. They led her into a briefing room, smaller than the chamber where everything had begun. A long table dominated the space, its surface crowded with papers, maps, and coffee cups half finished. A few young officers sat around it, voices low, pens scratching. They looked up when she entered, brows knitting with confusion. And then the general walked in. The room straightened instantly. Chairs scraped, spines stiffened. His presence carried weight that required no words. But his eyes sought only hers. "You came." Her throat tightened. "Don't mistake this, I came to say no." Something flickered in his expression, but he gave no sign of disappointment. Instead, he gestured to a seat. "Sit," he said. She remained standing. "Sit," he repeated softer, but with an edge that left no room for refusal. Against her will, she lowered herself into the chair. The table felt too big, too heavy with history. The officers began their briefing, words tumbling about factions, supply lines, whispers of an operation building across the border. Lena tried not to listen, but each word sank into her anyway, uninvited. Routes she knew, villages she remembered, faces she had once treated in makeshift clinics, children who had clung to her hands. Her stomach churned. The general let the officers speak, then dismissed them with a single nod. The door shut, leaving them alone. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Lena whispered, "Why me?" The general didn't answer immediately. He walked to the map pinned to the wall, tracing a line with one calloused finger. "This region has burned before," he said. "We stopped it once, but only just, and now it burns again. The soldiers we send now, they are brave, but they don't know the land, they don't know the language, they don't know what you know." Her chest ached. "You keep saying that as if it absolves me. It doesn't. I failed them, General. I failed the one who begged me not to leave. If you want me to go back, you're asking me to face a ghost that never stopped following me." His eyes turned, meeting hers across the table. They were steady, unflinching. "Perhaps that's exactly what you need to do." The words landed like a blow. Her nails dug into her palms under the table. She hated him for saying it. She hated him for being right. She looked down, her voice breaking. "What if I can't carry it again? What if I break this time?" His reply was quiet, but it pierced her. "Then you break trying to save someone. There are worse ways to fall." Her breath shook. The room blurred. She wanted to scream that he didn't understand, that he couldn't possibly know the weight of her shame. But she remembered his eyes when he spoke of believing she was dead. The grief that had lingered there. He did understand. And maybe that was why he had found her now. She pressed her hands against her face, forcing herself to breathe. When she lowered them, she met his gaze again. "Show me," she whispered. For the first time, his expression softened. Hours later, she stood in a training facility she hadn't seen in years. The air smelled of rubber mats and oil. Rows of equipment gleamed under fluorescent lights. The hum of treadmills, the thud of gloves against punching bags, the sharp crack of rifle fire from the adjoining range. Her stomach twisted. She didn't belong here anymore. Her hands were meant for mops, not rifles, for buckets, not bandages. But when the general handed her a pack, heavy, worn, the kind she used to carry through the desert, her body remembered. She slid her arms through the straps, adjusting them until they rested against her shoulders. The weight pressed into her, familiar, unforgiving. And something inside her broke. Not in weakness, in recognition. She walked to the range, lifted a rifle she hadn't touched in a decade. The metal was cold, unyielding. Her cheek pressed against the stock, her finger brushing the trigger. Her first shot cracked too high. Her second landed closer. By the third, the rhythm returned. Breathe in, hold, release. Bang! 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 Her chest heaved. Sweat stung her eyes, but her hands were steady. When she lowered the rifle, the general was watching. His nod was small, but his words carried weight. "You never lost it." She wanted to argue, wanted to insist it meant nothing, but deep inside she knew the truth. She hadn't lost it, she had only buried it. And now, for reasons she still didn't understand, the earth above it was being stripped away. That night she lay awake again, but this time it wasn't guilt that gnawed at her, it was fear. Not of death, she had made peace with that years ago. It was fear of being seen again, of being asked to carry what she had dropped once before, of stepping back into a world where promises weren't always kept. And yet beneath the fear, something else stirred. The faintest flicker of pride. She hated herself for it, but she couldn't deny it. Why did the air on the transport plane feel heavier than the air on the ground? Lena sat strapped into a narrow seat, the harness biting into her shoulder. The drone of engines drowned out thought, yet her pulse beat louder. Around her, soldiers checked weapons, adjusted helmets, muttered into radios. She kept her eyes on her knees, unwilling to meet their glances. To them, she was an anomaly, not quite one of them, not quite a civilian. A relic dragged back into a world that had moved on without her. And she hated how familiar it felt. Her fingers traced the seam of her gloves. The leather was new, stiff, nothing like the one she had once worn, broken by years of sweat and sand. The general sat across from her, unreadable as always. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His presence pressed against her like gravity. The briefing had been short, reconnaissance. A test. Move into a contested zone, extract intelligence, get out clean. They told her it was routine, but Lena knew better. There was no routine in war. Every test had a cost. The engines dipped, the plane beginning its descent. A soldier to her left tightened his grip on his rifle. Another closed his eyes, lips moving in silent prayer. Lena swallowed hard. The ramp opened. Heat slammed into them like a wall. Dust swirled, carried by the roar of propellers. One by one they filed out, boots hitting sand, voices sharp with commands. Lena stepped down last. The sunlight blinded her for a moment, and when her vision cleared, the landscape stretched before her. The same desert she had once fled. The same ridges, the same winds carrying the same scent of dust and ash. Her chest tightened. She was back. The squad moved quickly, spreading out in formation. Lena followed, her pack heavy against her back, her boots crunching over stone. She kept her head low, listening to the rhythm of their movements. Left, right, pause. The sound was different from her memories, but the cadence was the same. Minutes blurred into an hour. The sun bore down, draining strength, but Lena pressed on. She tried to focus on the present, on the map in her hand, on the coordinates etched into her memory. But the past kept whispering. This was the same road, the same valley, the same place where promises had been broken. Her throat dried, her pace faltered. The soldier ahead glanced back, brow furrowed. "You good?" She forced a nod. "Fine." But she was. They reached the outskirts of a village, low walls of stone and mud, roofs half collapsed, silence thick in the air. Windows gaped like empty eyes. No children, no livestock, only the weight of abandonment. The squad spread out, rifles raised, moving with precision. Lena followed slower, her eyes scanning for something she couldn't name. And then she heard it. A faint sound, too soft for gunfire, too fragile for machinery. A cry. Her heart stumbled. She froze, straining to hear. The others moved ahead, unaware. She turned her head, following the sound, her body moving before her mind gave permission. Behind a crumbling wall, she found it. A child, no older than 7. Dust streaked across his face, his shirt torn, his eyes wide with terror. He clutched something in his arms, a younger sibling, limp and pale, barely breathing. Lena dropped to her knees. Her hands moved instinctively, checking the child's pulse, lifting the chin to clear the airway. The smaller one's chest rose shallow, too shallow. Her voice shook. "I need water, cloth, anything." The soldier who had asked if she was okay appeared at her side, stunned. "General," he started, but Lena cut him off. Now! The urgency in her voice left no room for hesitation. He scrambled, pulling his canteen free, handing over a scarf. Lena worked quickly, wetting the fabric, pressing it against the child's forehead, coaxing water past cracked lips. Her fingers checked for wounds, bruises, anything hidden beneath the dust. The older boy stared at her, eyes round with desperate hope. And for a moment, she wasn't in the present anymore. She was back there under a broken sky, with soldiers gasping for breath and begging her not to stop. Her chest clenched. "Don't leave me." The memory stabbed, sharp and merciless. Her hands faltered. But then the younger child coughed, a ragged, shallow cough. Lena jolted back into focus. She pressed the scarf gently against the chest, monitoring each breath. The soldier beside her muttered something she didn't catch, all mingling with fear. The general's shadow fell across them. His voice was low, controlled. "We can't stay long." Lena didn't look up. "Then we take them." One of the soldiers hesitated. "They'll slow us down." Her head snapped up, eyes blazing. "They'll die if we leave them." The general held her gaze, long, testing. Then he gave a single nod. "Carry them." The squad adjusted without argument. The older boy was lifted onto one man's back, the smaller bundled into Lena's arms. She cradled the child against her chest, the weight too familiar, the warmth too fragile. They moved fast, leaving the village behind, cutting across open ground. Every step pounded into Lena's body, but she refused to falter. She listened to the faint breaths against her chest. She whispered words she didn't realize she remembered, lullabies in a language the others didn't understand. The horizon shimmered with heat. Shadows shifted along the ridges. Gunfire cracked. The squad dropped, shouts rising. Dust exploded around them. The sound of rifles answered, sharp, relentless. Lena hit the ground, curling around the child, shielding the small body with her own. Her pulse roared in her ears. The child whimpered, tiny fingers clutching at her uniform. Voices shouted commands. Bullets hissed overhead. The desert screamed with violence. The general's voice cut through it, calm and commanding. "Hold the line, move in pairs, don't let them flank." Lena pressed her face against the child's hair, whispering steady words though her chest shook. You're safe, I won't leave you." Her promise burned in her throat, because she knew what it meant to break one. The firefight lasted minutes that felt like hours. Finally, silence crept back, broken only by heavy breathing and the crackle of radios. The squad regrouped, dragging Lena up with them. The child still breathed, weak but alive. The general looked at her, his face unreadable, but his words carried weight. "You kept your promise this time." Lena couldn't speak. Her throat was tight, her arms aching, her heart breaking. Because she knew this was only the beginning. And the ghost she carried had just been given flesh again. Why did the silence after battle always feel heavier than the battle itself? The squad moved quickly through the desert night, shadows long against the moonlit ground. Their boots crunched softly, rifles still warm from the fight. Lena walked near the center, clutching the younger child close against her chest while the older boy rode on a soldier's back, head resting on the man's shoulder. Every few steps, Lena tilted her ear to listen for breath, still shallow, still fragile. Her muscles burned, her back ached, but she didn't dare loosen her grip. She remembered too clearly the moment a heartbeat had slipped away beneath her hands years ago. The weight of it had never left her. This time she would not fail. The general led them, his silhouette steady, unyielding. He didn't look back often, but when he did, his eyes found her every time, as if measuring whether she could carry what she had chosen to lift. The squad reached a temporary before dawn, a battered stone structure at the edge of the valley. The soldiers swept the interior, then waved the all clear. Inside, the air was thick with dust and old wood, but it was shelter. Lena sank against a wall, finally lowering the child onto a mat. She checked pulse, temperature, breathing. The boy stirred weakly, eyes fluttering open for a moment before closing again. Relief swept through her so sharp it left her dizzy. The older sibling was set down beside them, blinking with confusion, lips cracked from thirst. Lena pressed a canteen to his mouth. He drank in desperate gulps until she pulled it away gently. "You're safe now," she whispered, though the words felt fragile, breakable. The boy stared at her, too tired to answer, but his small hand crept toward hers. His fingers hooked around two of hers and didn't let go. Something inside her chest cracked open. She sat there for hours, half in the present, half in memory. She remembered being surrounded by wounded men, their hands grabbing her arms, their voices begging her to stay. She had failed them then, but here, at least here, she had kept her promise. Yet the victory didn't soothe her, it only deepened the fear. Because if she could save one, she could fail one again. The general approached quietly, his boots soft against the floor. He crouched beside her, his gaze steady on the children before turning to her. "They live because of you," he said simply. Lena shook her head. "They live because we were lucky, because we got there before it was too late." His expression didn't change. "Luck doesn't stop bullets, you did." Her throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to reject the credit. But the boy's hand still held hers, his tiny grip proof she couldn't dismiss. The general straightened, his shadow stretching across the room. "We'll move again at nightfall. Rest while you can." But Lena couldn't rest. She sat awake long after the others slept, listening to the slow breaths of the children, the muffled snores of soldiers, the creak of the building under the desert wind. Her body trembled with exhaustion, but her mind refused to quiet. Every moment brought the same question: why me? Why had fate dragged her back? Why had the general spoken those words in the hall? Why had these children been left in her path, forcing her hands back into the work she thought she'd abandoned? By morning, her head ached from sleeplessness. She rose quietly, stepping outside into the pale light of dawn. The horizon stretched endless, the sky washed in gray. For a moment, she felt small again, as she had so many years ago, one person against the vast, indifferent weight of war. The general was there, too, standing near the edge of the valley, arms folded. He didn't turn when she joined him. "You didn't sleep," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," she admitted. His eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. "Neither did I." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the wind. Finally, Lena spoke. "Why me, General? Why call me back into this? You could have let me stay hidden. You could have found someone else." He turned then, meeting her gaze. His eyes were lined with years of command, with grief and steel. "Because you were never meant to hide," he said. "And because some battles don't wait for volunteers. They come for those who can carry them." Her chest tightened. "What if I can't?" His reply was simple, but it sank deep. "Then you carry what you can. That's all any of us ever do." Lena looked away, swallowing hard. She wanted to hate him for dragging her back. But some part of her, the part that still felt the boy's hand clinging to hers, knew he was right. That night they moved again. The children were carried with them, bundled against soldiers' backs, guarded as fiercely as any mission objective. The desert stretched silent, stars sharp above them. Halfway through the march, the boy stirred in his sleep, whispering words Lena barely caught. She leaned closer. He murmured the same phrase again, in a dialect she hadn't heard in years. Her breath caught. It was the same phrase the soldier had whispered to her that night, the one who had begged her not to leave. Her knees nearly buckled. She steadied herself, her grip tightening on the child. Coincidence, she told herself, just coincidence. But deep in her chest, something shifted. When they reached the next checkpoint, Lena sat alone with the boy, brushing dust from his hair. His eyes opened briefly, staring into hers, as if he knew she was fighting ghosts. And in that gaze, fragile but steady, she saw something she had long forgotten. Not accusation, not blame, but trust. It pierced her deeper than any bullet. She bowed her head, pressing her forehead gently against his. Her voice was low, trembling. "I won't leave you, not this time." And in that vow, she realized something she hadn't dared admit. The war she was fighting wasn't against the enemy. It was against herself. Why did every step toward the village feel like walking deeper into her own grave? The squad moved at dusk, shadows stretching long across the desert floor. Lena carried the younger child on her hip, though one of the soldiers had offered to take him. She refused. The boy's fragile breaths anchored her in ways she couldn't explain, reminding her of why she was here, of why she couldn't turn away this time. The older sibling walked beside her, clutching her sleeve with a stubborn grip that reminded her of herself once, fierce, silent, refusing to be left behind. His small fingers burned against her arm, a weight heavier than her pack. Ahead, the general signaled a halt. The squad crouched behind a ridge, eyes fixed on the village below. Through her binoculars, Lena saw what they had feared. Trucks lined the square. Armed men patrolled, their weapons glinting under lantern light. Civilians huddled near the well, women clutching children, men kept apart under guard. The sound of crying carried even across the dry air. Lena's throat tightened. She remembered scenes like this too well, the helpless gathered, the armed few dictating their fate. The same script, repeated across years, across wars. One of the soldiers whispered, "They've doubled numbers. We weren't expecting this many." Another muttered, "We don't have time to wait for backup." The general's face was carved in stone. "We move anyway." The soldiers nodded, tension thick, but Lena's stomach twisted. She looked at the children beside her, then back at the village. "Wait," she whispered. "You can't just rush in. They'll kill the civilians first. You've seen it before. They'll use them as shields." The general's eyes flicked to her, sharp, measuring. "What do you propose?" Her pulse raced. She wasn't supposed to speak. She wasn't supposed to know. But the words poured out, pulled from memory. "They gather at the well. It means water is scarce. The guards are tired. Look at the way their rifles hang, the way they lean on their heels. They've been there for hours. If you strike from the east ridge, the glare of the sun will blind them for just long enough." And she hesitated but pressed on. "There's an alley here." She pointed to a shadowed cut between buildings. "It leads straight to the well. One medic could move unseen, pull civilians into cover before the first shots are fired." The soldiers stared, some skeptical, some surprised. The general's gaze didn't waver. "One medic, you mean you?" Her mouth went dry. She hadn't meant. She hadn't meant to volunteer. But the silence left no room to back away. Her chest heaved. She glanced at the children beside her, at their fragile trust. She thought of the soldier she had left behind years ago, the promise she had broken. Her voice shook, but it was steady enough. "Yes, me." The general nodded once, then "It's decided." Preparation moved quickly. Lena pressed her forehead against the older boy for a brief moment. "Stay here. I'll come back." His eyes searched hers, and she felt the weight of his silent question. "Will you keep this promise too?" She turned before he could see her tears. The squad split, half circling to the ridge, weapons ready, the other half preparing to cover her approach. Lena moved alone, slipping through the sand, her breath shallow, her hands trembling against the straps of her pack. The alley loomed ahead, narrow, choked with shadows. She pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering, waiting for the signal. And then it came, the crack of rifles from the east, the eruption of shouts, chaos spilling into the square. Lena ran. Her boots pounded the ground, her breath tearing at her chest. She reached the well, dropping to her knees, pulling children into the shadows, urging women to move, her voice low but fierce. "This way now, go." The world exploded around her. Bullets ricocheted, screams pierced the air. She shoved bodies into cover, shielded them with her own frame, dragged a boy by the wrist into the alley. Her mind narrowed to instinct, the old rhythm returning whether she wanted it or not. And then she saw him. A man slumped against the well, blood darkening his shirt, eyes glazed with shock. He wasn't a soldier, just a villager caught in the crossfire. His lips moved, forming words too faint to hear. Lena froze. The memory slammed into her, another man, another night, his hand gripping her wrist, his voice begging, "Don't leave me." Her knees buckled, the present blurred with the past. Her breath stuttered, her hands hovered unsure. The man coughed, blood bubbling on his lips. His eyes pleaded. This time, Lena didn't run. She pressed her palms to his wound, her voice breaking as she called for bandages. Her hands worked, steady even through the tremor of her soul. She whispered to him, to herself, "I won't leave you. I won't. Not this time." Gunfire roared. Dust filled the air. But Lena stayed, anchored by her choice, by the promise she had broken once and would not break again. The general's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. Extraction now. Soldiers moved in, covering the retreat. Lena hauled the wounded man with help, dragging him into the alley, civilians streaming behind. Bullets chased them, but the squad held the line, moving with precision born of desperation. When they reached the ridge, the children she had saved earlier were waiting, eyes wide, hands outstretched. The older boy threw his arms around her waist, clinging tight. Lena collapsed to her knees, chest heaving, arms trembling. The wounded man gasped beside her, still alive. The general approached, his face shadowed by dust and firelight. His words were low, steady. "You kept your promise." Lena looked up, tears streaking her cheeks, her throat raw. For the first time, she believed him. But deep inside, she also knew the truth. This war was far from over. And the ghosts she carried were not finished with her yet. Why did silence always come too late? The night after the raid, the squad sheltered in a half-ruined farmhouse on the edge of the desert plain. The walls leaned as if exhausted, beams cracked by years of neglect. But for now, it was enough. Civilians huddled in corners, their faces hollow with fear and relief. Children slept in piles of blankets, too drained to cry. The rescued man breathed shallowly under Lena's care, each rise and fall of his chest a fragile victory. The soldiers cleaned weapons, spoke in low voices, but their eyes kept drifting toward her, not with suspicion anymore, with something harder to carry, expectation. Lena sat against the wall, head bowed, hands trembling from the memory of blood. The boy who had clung to her earlier curled beside her, his small body pressed into her arm as if afraid she would vanish if he let go. And she wondered, had she already crossed the line she had promised never to step over again? She told herself she had only come back for this, for one mission, one rescue, but the folder with maps still weighed down her pack. The general's words still echoed, "Strength is not about right, it's about choice." Her chest ached, because choice didn't feel like freedom, it felt like chains. At dawn, the general called her outside. The air was cool, the desert stretched wide and endless, painted in pale light. He stood with his back to her, hands clasped behind him, posture unbroken despite exhaustion. "You saved lives," he said without turning. Her voice cracked. "I also almost lost myself." He faced her then. His eyes were sharp but not unkind. "That's what it means to stand where others fall. It costs you. It always will." She shook her head, words spilling in a rush. "You don't understand. I broke a promise once. I left someone behind. He begged me and I walked away. That's what I've carried all these years. That's why I ran. And now," her breath hitched, "now I'm terrified I'll do it again." The general stepped closer, his voice lowered. "Do you think I don't carry the same ghosts? Every commander, every medic, every soldier who's walked away from a battlefield carries them. You don't escape it, Lena. You live with it, or it swallows you." Her eyes stung. "And if I fail again?" He placed a hand on her shoulder, heavy, steady. Then you fail trying to save, and there is no shame in that. Her breath broke. She looked away, blinking hard at the horizon. A distant sound cut the air. Engines, low, growing louder, trucks. The general's hand dropped, his jaw tightened. They're coming. The squad scrambled, pulling civilians to their feet, loading gear. Panic rippled through the farmhouse. Lena's heart pounded. She gathered the children, lifting the smaller one into her arms, guiding the older by the hand. Their eyes were wide, searching hers for reassurance she barely had the strength to give. Gunfire cracked in the distance. Dust plumes rose along the valley. The enemy was close. The general barked orders, voice sharp, cutting through the chaos. Evacuate North Ridge. Move fast. The squad surged forward, ushering civilians out, weapons raised. Lena ran with them, lungs burning, legs straining beneath the weight of the child in her arms. Bullets hissed past, the air filled with screams, shouts, the thunder of boots. They reached the ridge, scrambling over rocks, bodies pressing close for cover. The enemy fire grew heavier, rattling against stone, chasing them up the slope. A scream tore the air. Lena spun. The older boy had stumbled, his small body crumpled on the ground. Soldiers shouted, but they were too far. Her chest seized, time fractured. She saw the battlefield again, years ago, the soldier's hand clutching her wrist, his voice breaking. Don't leave me. Her knees buckled, the world blurred. Not again. She shoved the younger child into a soldier's arms and ran. Bullets tore dust at her feet, but she didn't stop. She dove, sliding against the ground, wrapping her arms around the boy, pulling him tight to her chest. Gunfire rained. Her body shielded his. Pain seared across her arm as a round grazed past, hot and merciless. She bit back a cry, clutching him, whispering through her teeth, I won't leave you, I won't. The general's voice roared above the chaos, commanding cover fire. Soldiers unleashed a barrage, driving the enemy back long enough for Lena to stagger up, dragging the boy against her. Strong hands seized her shoulders, pulling her into cover behind the rocks. She collapsed, gasping, the boy sobbing against her chest. Blood streaked her sleeve, hot and sticky, but he was alive. Alive. She rocked him, tears spilling freely. You're safe, I kept it. I kept the promise this time. The general crouched beside her, his eyes sharp but glistening faintly in the firelight. His voice was low, steady, but it carried the weight of truth. This is who you are, Lena, not the ghost, not the cleaner hiding in gray, this. She shook her head, sobbing, I can't be her again. You already are. The battle raged, but in that moment the noise faded. All she heard was the child's breath, fragile and real, proof that this time she had not failed. Hours later, after the enemy was driven back and the squad reached safety, Lena sat with the children under the shadow of a ridge. Her arm was bandaged, her body drained, but her heart felt something she hadn't allowed in years. Not pride, not absolution, but peace. The general approached quietly, lowering himself to sit beside her. For a long while they said nothing, watching the children sleep. Finally, Lena whispered, What happens now? He exhaled, long and tired. The fight isn't over. It may never be, but you've already answered the question you kept running from. Her brows furrowed. What question? He looked at her, eyes lined with truth. Whether you could keep a promise, now you know you can. Her throat tightened. She looked at the boy curled against her side, his small hand still tangled in her sleeve. Tears stung her eyes, but she let them fall, because this time they didn't feel like shame. They felt like release. As the desert wind whispered around them, Lena closed her eyes, resting her head back against the stone. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to breathe without guilt. Because she understood something the years of hiding had never given her. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.